Well, the first thing you want to do is understand what the implicit, less conscious, positive and negative associations are about your brand. So that's number one, because you need to know what you're up against in order to create a strategy. Two, find out what your barriers are. Barriers are what holds back growth. If your growth target, the people you're trying to reach, have negative associations and barriers, then it doesn't matter if you're spending $100 million on advertising, they're not going to convert. They're not going to come over. So we need to understand our barriers and have a very deliberate strategy for overcoming them. Third, create a strategy that deluges the mind in positive associations. And then fourth, build distinctive brand assets that are connected with your brand to codify those positive associations. If you do all those things, you're going to be off to the races.
Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where leadership meets real-world insights. In each episode, you can eavesdrop on exclusive conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, and experts in leadership, communication, relationships, culture, and everything else that shapes your effectiveness in the workplace and in your personal life. Leadership is here for you. Now, here's our host, himself a seasoned coach and best-selling author, Dr. Rodger Dean Duncan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where we explore the mindset, skills, and behaviors that help you succeed in every relationship in your life, especially those in which people look to you for leadership. Here's a question that might stop you in your tracks. What if much of what you've been taught about persuasion is wrong? My guest for this episode of Leadership is Leslie Zane. She has spent nearly 3 decades proving that people don't make decisions with their conscious minds. They decide on the basis of instinct. She says that if you're still trying to win customers, followers, or believers with facts, logic, and emotional stories alone, you're fighting an uphill battle against the very architecture of the human brain. Leslie, who holds degrees from both Yale and Harvard, is an award-winning Fortune 100 brand consultant, TEDx speaker, and founder of Triggers, the pioneering brand consultancy rooted in behavioral science. She's also author of the book, The Power of Instinct, The New Rules of Persuasion in Business and Life. Her work has been featured in many of the top media outlets, including my Forbes column. Leslie Zane, welcome to Leadership.
Oh, Rodger, it's so great to be here. This is our second or third time talking, so thank you so much for having me back.
I'm looking forward to it. Let me ask, what was the aha moment that convinced you that the unconscious mind, not the conscious mind, is truly driving the decisions we make every day?
Well, you ready for a story?
I am.
Okay. Well, when I was a youngin', back in the day, long before I started my own company, I was working at Johnson & Johnson on the baby business, and I noticed that business was down. And I also noticed that we only had moms and babies and the conventional, Madonna and child pose in all of our advertising, and it was pretty generic. And there were other brands that were already starting to make inroads. And the other thing I had noticed was that dads were getting more involved in caregiving. They were taking their children to soccer games. They were changing diapers. And so this was my moment. And the biggest thing I noticed was that when a dad walked down the street pushing a baby stroller, moms' heads would turn. And so this was my moment. I put on my highest high heels, my power watch, my pussy bow blouse, my skirt suit, which was the uniform of the early 90s. And I marched into my boss's office and I said, I know how we're going to turn around the Johnson's baby business. Let's put the first dad in a Johnson's baby shampoo commercial. And he said, you're crazy. It's moms, not dads, that buy these products, and we have no research to support anything that you're saying. Because we were talking about instinct. We were talking about this instinctive connection that moms had to this visual of a father and baby. And I kept on this track. I kept advocating for this for months, years. And I think at the end of the day, they finally gave in out of sheer exhaustion. Oh, by the way, I got a bad performance review. Leslie is too passionate about putting fathers in advertising, and this is an executional concern, not a strategic one. Oh my God, that one was like a knife in my heart. But they finally did give in and do it. And guess what happened? Highest scoring commercial in the company's history. Products started flying off the shelves. The business turns around. Huge success story. And that was my moment. That was my aha moment, that I realized that there are these sort of subconscious cues or triggers. That was really my first trigger that I discovered. Dad with baby instead of mom with baby was a trigger that worked at a subconscious level to connect on this very visceral level that nobody was researching, nobody was capturing in any other data. But it was the key to turning around the business. So there's a direct connection between what happens in the unconscious mind, instinct, and sales. And that is like a wild connection that is something really to be tapped into by every business.
Well, and you look back on that incident, and by the way, I assume that your performance reviews were given to you by men.
They were.
Yeah, shame on them. But we look back at that now and it makes so much sense. I mean, it just makes so much sense, but I'm sure that you were kind of pushing water uphill with a rake.
I sure was. I have the battle scars to prove it.
Well, now you came up through Procter Gamble, Johnson & Johnson, Bain Company, Yale, and Harvard Business School. How did that traditional business training both prepare you for and perhaps hold you back from the unconventional ideas that you promote today?
Well, I'm very proud of my background, and I loved working at all of those places, and I loved my education at Yale and Harvard. However, the foundations of business that I was taught in all of these places were very conventional. And I think you can think about it as I saw kind of what works and what doesn't work, and a lot doesn't work. It was very hard to grow businesses. It was very hard to get growth. I would see one brand up a half a share point, then the next year the other brand gets a half a share point, and it was really hard to drive growth for these businesses consistently. Getting sustainable growth was very difficult. And that's what I had been taught was what we're looking for and is the key to successful business. So I think you could say that I learned the landscape. I got a foundation from those places, but that actually proved to be a wonderful playground for me to try these other approaches. And I built on top of that foundation what really ended up being cracking the code on driving accelerated growth.
Yeah. Well, you certainly showed people what it means when you genuinely challenge the status quo. So you introduced the concept of brand connectome. I'm going to spell it for our listeners, connectome. Walk us through what a connectome is and tell us why it's such a game changer.
Well, of course, I love that question because I'm extremely passionate about the brand connectome. So the brand connectome is the cumulative memories that get sort of glued to a brand in our unconscious minds. And some of these cumulative memories go as far back as childhood. So if you're a brand like Pepsi and Coke and McDonald's, brands that have been around for a very long time, you have this vast, large connectome filled with these memories. And why it's really important is because it becomes something that you are empowered to change and to influence. The fact that it even exists is really the first discovery. And these are basically networks of memories and associations in the unconscious mind. And if you can tap into them, you can grow your business faster. You can grow your personal brand faster. You can make more money. The possibilities are sort of endless. And the fact is that they exist in every business under the sun. So it's B2B, B2C, it's in healthcare, it's in pharma. There isn't a category. We have brand connectomes for everything that we choose. So I'd like you to think about it like I'm planting a seed in other people's minds. The seed is the name of the brand. And little by little, as I add soil, water, and sun, which are the positive associations to that seed, the seed grows from a seed into a seedling, into a little plant. And then little by little, as it puts down roots and grows a canopy, the moment that you create a full-grown tree in other people's minds, you have a healthy, thriving brand that people are going to choose. Your brand connectome has to be physically larger than the brand connectome of your competitors for that brand to be chosen, because it has more scale in your mind. It's more positive. It has more scale. It's larger. So it becomes the brand that you instinctively choose on autopilot without thinking. And why that's important is because we all want to have instinctive brand preference. We want to have people buying us automatically without thinking, because then you don't need to spend a lot on advertising and marketing.
Right.
It becomes like a flywheel, a business flywheel.
You just need to remind people.
You do, for sure, you do.
Now, you argue that traditional persuasion, loading people up with facts, data, and features, is essentially an uphill battle. Why do so many smart leaders still default to that approach?
Well, that's how we're raised. We're raised
for sure
to make an argument, to present our argument. And I mean, really, even in school, you write a research paper, you write an essay, you start with a thesis, and then you prove it with your backup points and your rationale. So we're really taught to operate this way, and we think it's going to work with other people. But the fact is, the moment we try to persuade, we've kind of lost them at hello, because they know exactly what we're up against. They know that we're trying to sell them something, and that's when people get their backs up and they back away. So we need to be much more subtle in the way that we approach anything that we're trying to achieve. Obviously, I have some techniques that I can explain for how to do that. But persuasion is a lost battle. I mean, just think about the last time you had an argument with somebody at Thanksgiving dinner about politics. You can bring all the facts to the table, and you're not persuading them 1 minute to change their minds.
Exactly. Well, now, you use Taylor Swift as a case study. What has she done, perhaps even without knowing it, to build an instinctive following of almost cult-like loyalty? What has she done?
So Taylor Swift has one of the probably healthiest, most vibrant, and largest brand connectomes there are. And she's done it by continually expanding her connectome and expanding her memories and associations, the memories and associations people have of her, while continuing to reinforce the old ones. So she moved from one genre of music into the other, from country to pop into indie and folk. She even experimented with dance music. So she keeps innovating and keeps adding new types of music, but she doesn't forget to keep reinforcing the original ones that she birthed from the beginning. So she practices a technique we call layering. She's layering the new associations and the new memories on top of the older memories and making sure people don't forget the older memories, the older associations, while she's creating new ones. She also has multiple relationships with her audience. Most celebrities have a relationship that's pretty one-sided, where the consumer is sort of looking up to and aspiring to be like the celebrity. It's very much a one-sided relationship. That is not what Taylor Swift does. It's more of a two-way relationship. She's sharing the most intimate details of her life and her boyfriends, what she goes through. She has a very sort of open and transparent relationship with people. So it's personal, it's professional. Women, men, because they both love Taylor Swift, they think they're part of her friend circle, like they dream about her. Some people call her mom. And so this is just amazing multi-dimensional relationship that exists on many levels. And she has just this continuously expanding, ever thriving connectome that explains why she was able to create these billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar tours.
Well, she's clearly a very smart marketer. I don't know what kind of training she had in that, probably none. Maybe she's just born with that gift, but she's very good at it.
Yes, she is. And it's absolutely possible that many people can do this by instinct.
Right.
But it's better to kind of know what you're doing, especially for those people who don't have that Taylor Swift instinct. But I did want to go back to something you asked me before, which is, well, if leaders are trying to sell an idea at a company, like how do they do this? How do they avoid that, persuasion problem where they're just going to be met with the hand? We're not going to do it.
Yeah.
And there's really three things that I suggest. The first thing is we all humans, we have the tendency to wait until something's fully baked, the perfect presentation, the perfectly crafted idea before we go into our boss's office.
Right.
That's not a good idea. What we want to do is build the connectome in the other person's mind about your idea over time. Pull them in before your plan is fully baked. Don't wait till it's perfect. That goes against our nature, but it's actually the more effective thing to do. 2, collaborate. Ask them to build on your ideas. If they become part of it, if they start interacting with your idea, they'll have more ownership in it. And then the third thing is just simply more frequent interaction with the ultimate decision maker rather than less frequent interaction. So those three things I think can help kind of overcome, because what you're doing is you're building the subconscious familiarity and connection with your idea little by little over time.
Sure.
You're going to have better results that way.
You're making the other person part of the evolution of the connectome.
100%.
And if they feel that it's their idea, that's okay.
That's even better.
Yeah,
That's
it's
even better.
better.
Exactly.
Your change initiative has the budget. The strategy looks solid, and everyone's nodding along in the meetings. But for some reason, it's going nowhere. Dr. Rodger Dean Duncan knows why. After 40 years in the trenches with top business leaders, he knows that change fails when organizations lack the right foundations: trust, accountability, and real communication. Dr. Duncan's free 10-minute assessment shows you exactly where your organization stands. Answer a few straightforward questions that reveal your true change readiness level. Don't waste months discovering the hard way. Get your free assessment today at leadershop.net/change. Again, that's leadershop.net/change.
So, can a brand fully recover from a major scandal or trust breach, or does the connectome permanently carry that damage?
It's a great question. So the damage is basically a memory, a negative association.
Sure.
Memories can be reinforced and strengthened. So if you keep bringing up that negative association, you're actually going to inadvertently reinforce it and make it stronger. But if you displace that negative association with a positive association or positive associations, then little by little, that damaged memory, that negative association will fade over time. And so that is really the art of managing the brand connectome. You need to understand what those negative associations are as soon as possible and nip them in the bud and start replacing them with positive associations very, very quickly so that that negative association doesn't linger, doesn't fester, doesn't turn into a virus that hurts your brand connectome.
Yeah.
And there are many brands that have recovered
Sure.
from negative associations.
Tylenol.
Tylenol is a great example. Similac recovered from the infant formula crisis.
Right.
McDonald's recovered from the pink slime problem with its real food strategy that we actually worked on. And so it is absolutely possible. And I think that's really one of my biggest messages to business leaders. You're not stuck with the associations that your brand has. And even in personal branding, with respect to your own career, you can absolutely change the nature of your brand connectome, make it more positive, make it larger, and build your brand successfully over time. You just have to be aware that you absolutely do need to manage it.
Sure. Well, you apply these principles to political candidates and social movements. How does the connectome explain why voters often seem to vote against their own rational self-interest? What's going on there?
Well, I love that question because political parties, Republican and Democrat, candidates for office, even presidents have brand connectomes too.
Sure.
Right? So everybody has a brand connectome. So in the social media environment that we live in today, we receive a lot of our messages subconsciously, and we don't realize that we are being vastly influenced in these echo chambers that reinforce the same either negative or positive associations
Right.
about one party or another, one candidate or another, over and over and over again, until we, in many ways, our brains almost become radicalized for or against a party, for or against a candidate. And so we think that we're operating on our own volition, but we're not. And so it becomes very easy to see how somebody could vote against their own interest because their brain has been overly influenced in one direction or another. And it may actually be a direction that goes against their own self-interest.
Well, you mentioned the concept of instinctive brand preference, where people automatically choose your brand. What do leaders need to do to achieve that level of dominance?
So instinctive brand preference essentially means that your brand is being chosen on autopilot over and over and over again without any thought. So that is literally a financial flywheel for any business that can achieve that. So we all want to shoot for that. And it's different from loyalty because loyalty assumes some kind of conscious devotion where people are recommending the brand to other people. That's really not what's going on. Instinctive brand preference means it's automatic and it's as a result of a large connectome. So the first thing you want to do is build a physically large connectome. The connectome has physicality. It can grow and it can shrink in the mind. So the more positive associations we build onto our brand connectome, the more it will sprout and cover more of your brain terrain so that your brand is instinctively chosen. So build a large connectome, become the prototype for your category, sort of be the iconic brand in that category. Keep reinforcing your past while you invent the future. And also build distinctive brand assets, which are sticky, visual and verbal distinctive brand assets that are known specifically to your brand, because then the brand connectome has more anchors in your mind and it becomes, again, iconic and larger and becomes instinctively chosen. That's kind of the formula.
Right. So when a company is going through a major change, say a merger, a rebrand, a leadership transition, how do you protect the existing connectome while building something new and fresh?
Well, that's a great question because a lot of business leaders make the mistake of doing a 180 and forgetting the existing company as they reinvent or create the new one. So for sure, you want to keep reinforcing your pioneering past and your heritage. You don't want to ever forget your heritage. So you need to keep telling new generations of consumers and customers about your past so they're not forgotten. But customers love consistency and change scares people. And so my formula for brand evolution is keep, stop, add. Keep the positive associations you have. Those are super important for the core customer, so you don't lose them. Keep reinforcing those memories. Stop the negative associations that you may be inadvertently sending to people. And then add the new positive associations from this acquisition or from this transformation that you're doing to bring in the new people. Keep, stop, add. That is a formula for evolution as opposed to revolution. And evolution will make sure that you hold on to the old customers while you're bringing in the new, as opposed to thinking that you're going to bring in the new and then ending up losing more of the core than you thought. That often happens in rebrands.
When you talk about that, it reminds me of an experience I had about 30 years ago. Now I wish I had known about connectomes then. I was working with one of my clients, an international engineering firm, and they sent me to Great Britain to talk with some people in a company they were about to acquire. They were going to merge the companies. And they said, go talk to the senior leaders and come back and tell us what you think. So I did, and I came back, and I didn't have all these language patterns that you have in this framework, but I just said, it's not a fit. It is not a fit. I know your culture very, very well. I got a sense of their culture. It's not going to fit, and you will be very disappointed if you go ahead with this merger. Fortunately, they trusted me enough that they canceled the merger. But I would have been even more persuasive if I'd had the language patterns and the framework that you're using, because it just makes so much sense. Now, we had connectomes 30 years ago, but we weren't talking about them.
100%. But you have very good instincts. And so you knew on your own, without that construct, exactly what would happen. So good for you.
So how is artificial intelligence changing the landscape of instinctive persuasion? Is it making it easier or harder to build genuine connectomes?
So if by genuine connectomes, you mean connectomes that are built without being unduly influenced by bad actors,
right?
I'm going to say that AI is, just as dangerous as social media from that standpoint. Because what social media and AI both do is they hack our connectomes. They tap into our own brain's algorithms and they feed on our instinctive tendencies. So it's really speed and scale that AI now has, probably even more than social media did. And we can be unduly influenced, and it's happening at breakneck speed. I think that this next era, it's another technological transformation that we have to be very, very careful about. And I don't think we did enough to protect our young people or anybody really from the damages of social media. And so now we're going into yet a new one before we fix the old issue. And I think that there's a lot of landmines out there.
For sure. So as consumers become more aware of behavioral science and marketing tactics, will the instinctive mind become harder to reach?
I don't think so. I think most people go about their lives in the same manner. They're really not aware of the unconscious mind. The brain has two mechanisms, the conscious and the unconscious mind. And we're not even aware. It's working so quickly, the unconscious mind, that we're not even aware what it's doing or what it's taking in. I wish that weren't true. I wish we actually could recognize when we're being unduly influenced.
Right.
But that's just not how our brains operate. It's too fast for us to even recognize.
So leaders often deal with resistance to change. What are some best practices for introducing new ideas to skeptical people?
Well, that's a great question. I would say the first thing is to always anchor in the familiar.
Okay.
We are hardwired to connect with the familiar and to reject the unique. And that's kind of counterintuitive because in marketing, you're taught that you should be as unique as possible, create something from Mars, but actually people reject something from Mars. So what we want to do is always anchor the new idea in with a little bit of familiar so that people have something to latch onto that they can recognize. The second thing you want to do is to create sticky codes and cues around your idea or plan. And the third is to leverage what people already think. Connect to something that is already in their minds, and then your idea will go into their memory structure faster and more easily.
Well, I go back to what you did at Johnson & Johnson with the fathers. You clearly sort of anchored with what I hope many people would believe is that fathers have a responsibility for parenthood too. Fathers can do things that might not be traditionally a so-called father duty, but I'd like to go back and see some of those commercials.
Yeah, well, I happen to have them, and I'd be happy to show them to you. That would be fun. But really what the father and baby was a creative twist on the familiar mother and baby.
Yeah, sure.
That they were used to seeing in all of the commercials. And this was the first time that a father was actually put in a commercial. So it was easy to make that transition, but it had the wonderful added benefits of being visually striking.
Yeah.
And to also communicate all these positive associations, progressive company. This is the dad giving the mom a break. And also just the tenderness of seeing that strong male figure against and in contrast with the very tender, tiny, fragile newborn baby. It was just a much bigger visual contrast that was arresting from an imagery standpoint.
Well, several years ago at our local church, I was in a position of leadership, and so I decided we're going to install changing tables in the men's restrooms. Now, that was kind of off the wall for some people,
That's
but
wild.
I said, hey, the fathers need to change diapers too. So, at first there was a little bit of pushback, not from the mothers. There was no pushback from the mothers, but the fathers got on board.
You were ahead of your time. Amazing. I love it.
So, one final question. For the leaders listening right now, Leslie, what is the single first step that they should take this week, if possible, to start harnessing the power of instinct in their organization?
Well, the first thing you want to do is diagnose your brand connectome.
Right.
Understand what the implicit, less conscious, positive and negative associations are about your brand. So that's number one, because you need to know what you're up against in order to create a strategy, right? 2, find out what your barriers are. Barriers are what holds back growth. If your growth target, the people you're trying to reach, have negative associations and barriers, then it doesn't matter if you're spending $100 million on advertising. They're not going to convert. They're not going to come over. So we need to understand our barriers and have a very deliberate strategy for overcoming them. 3rd, create a strategy that deluges the mind in positive associations. And then 4th, build distinctive brand assets that are connected with your brand to codify those positive associations. If you do all those things, 1, diagnose your connectome, 2, find your barriers, 3, create a strategy that overcomes those barriers with positive associations, and 4, codify all of that with distinctive brand assets, you're going to be off to the races.
I hope people were taking notes, and fortunately, they can go back and re-listen to this because you've given us such a wonderful overview and a wonderful to-do list, if you will. Thank you so much, Leslie, for joining us on Leadership. To our listeners, I say, if this conversation sparked something for you, it's probably because it tapped into more than just logic. It connected with instinct. As Leslie reminds us, real influence doesn't come from forcing change. It comes from understanding how people are already wired and then working with it. So here's something to reflect on. What instincts are shaping your decisions and the decisions of the people you lead without your even realizing it? Remember this, you're not just in the business of making great products or delivering great services. You're in the business of building a connectome, a web of associations that live in the minds of the people you're trying to reach and influence. The question is not whether instinct is driving decisions. It is. The question is, are you intentionally shaping it? Be sure to leave a review of our podcast. Even a single sentence fuels the algorithms that promote the great content that the Leadership podcast provides. And for free resources to help you in your leadership journey, go to leadership.net. That's leadership.net. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and spread good cheer wherever you go. For Leadership, I'm Rodger Dean Duncan.